The blood on Mira Tallman's knuckles wasn't from any fight, though it felt like she'd been battling ghosts all morning. It was from scrubbing the iron stove in Mrs. Lottie's boarding house, where soot and grease clung to the cast iron lip like sin to a preacher's son. She'd scrubbed past skin, past feeling. The bleeding started somewhere around the third hour, but there was no time to stop. Mira tied a handkerchief around her hand and shoved it into the pocket of her stained skirt. Her knees cracked as she stood the wooden floor beneath her still damp. Outside, Ely's wind howled like it wanted to peel the paint off the desert. It carried grit and gossip in equal parts, slipping through the cracks of this boomtown like fate itself. She had 12 minutes to get to her second job at the general store. The stairs groaned beneath her boots. Mrs. Lottie barely glanced up from her knitting when Mira passed the parlor. "You're dripping on my rugs," the woman said flatly. "I'll pay in blood," then, Mira muttered, without stopping. She stepped into the noon glare. Her hair was pinned back tight, her blouse damp at the collar. The dust on the street had a taste iron and heat and everything Mira couldn't afford to dream about. By the time she reached Denson's General Supply, her throat burned and her hand throbbed under the cloth. She unpacked a new shipment of flour sacks, stacked them with the methodical precision of someone who knew exactly how to stretch strength. The regulars came in and out, miners with red-rimmed eyes, wives with calloused fingers, children who already looked tired. Mira barely looked up. "Watch your hand," Rosalie whispered behind the counter as she passed. "You're bleeding through." "It'll clot," Mira said. Rosalie Hatch had been her friend since school days, but life had split them into different tracks. Rosalie worked one job. Mira worked 3. That was the only difference, and the difference between drowning slowly and being yanked under. At 3 o'clock, sharp, Mira took the back exit and slipped around to the saloon. She tied on a fresh apron, splashed water on her face, and told herself not to care. The saloon was full already, prospectors with silver in their beards and dust in their bones, railroad men with fists like shovels, and the same hollow songs leaking from the old upright piano in the corner. Mira worked the floor like she didn't feel the sting in her ribs or the pounding in her feet. She learned long ago that tiredness wasn't a luxury, it was a constant. Like taxes. Like debt. She was pouring whiskey into a cracked glass when she noticed him. A man in the corner, back to the wall, his hat low, but not so low she couldn't see the lines of his face. Strong-jawed, weather-worn. He didn't leer. He didn't call out like the others. He simply watched her pale eyes following her like wind follows the curve of a canyon. Mira set down the bottle and crossed the room, not sure why. Her tray felt heavier than it was. "You here for a drink or just haunting the corners?" she asked. "Coffee if you've got it," he said. His voice was quiet, steady, and a bit of information. "We charge extra for both," she replied. He smiled, not much, but enough to soften the edges of his face. "I heard you work 3 jobs," he said. She narrowed her eyes. "And I hear men talk too much." He nodded. "Fair. But I've got a house that needs managing. 10 miles north of here. I'll pay $40 a month. Room. Board. You keep the accounts, cook clean. And rest." Mira nearly dropped her tray. $40. That was more than the boarding house, the store, and the saloon combined. It was enough to buy back her father's debt in less than a year. It was freedom in numbers. She stepped back. "Nobody pays that kind of wage unless there's a catch." "There is," he said. "I need someone who stays." That was when her chest tightened, not from panic, but from something worse. Hope. "You think I'm that kind of woman. I think you're tired of being every other kind," he answered. She blinked. "What's your name?" she asked. "Calder Yazzie." She recognized the name. Heard it from the banker once. Rancher, lone wolf. Paid in silver, never in promises. But still 10 miles from town was a long way. No neighbors, no help. Why me, she asked. Because people talk, Calder said, rising slowly. And they all say the same thing. That Mira Tallman works like a woman trying to outrun death. I figure that kind of work ethic deserves better pay. You can ask around. Sheriff Morrison, Rosalie Hatch, bankers. They'll tell you I don't lie. She swallowed hard, her breath hitching. I need time, she said, to ask, to think. I'm at the hotel on Main, room 9. I leave Sunday. After that, the offer's gone. Calder tipped his hat, turned, and walked out. Mira stood still. The piano kept playing. The men kept shouting. But something in her had gone quiet. At midnight, she trudged up the stairs above the laundry, peeled off her shoes, and stared at the ceiling. Her blistered hands rested on her stomach like folded regrets. $40. A real bed. A house with no drunks. But also isolation, dependence, risk. She thought of her father, the way he coughed up blood in the final months, the contracts he signed with trembling hands, the ones that bound her future to his broken past. Mira turned over, facing the wall. The desert wind beat gently against the glass. She had 2 days to decide, and a lifetime to regret it if she chose wrong. 6 months of my life in exchange for freedom, and I want that in ink, not promises. Mira stood behind the counter at Denson's General Supply, her apron stiff with starch, and her thoughts heavier than the flour sacks she'd stacked that morning. The moment she'd stepped inside, the bell over the door jangling like it always did, Rosalie knew something was off. You didn't even grunt when you saw the new bolt of calico, Rosalie murmured, nudging her toward the back room. Out with it. Mira waited until the curtain dropped behind them before whispering, You know Calder Yazzie. Rosalie blinked, then crossed her arms. Rancher out in Steptoe Valley, pays in gold coin, stays out of town, doesn't talk much. He offered me a job, Mira said. Housekeeper. $40 a month. Rosalie let out a low whistle. You're bleeding. 40, Mira nodded. Did he touch you? She said quickly. Didn't even lean in close. Rosalie studied her face. You believe him, I don't know. But if he's telling the truth, I could be debt-free by next spring. Rosalie didn't speak for a moment. Her gaze drifted to Mira's wrapped hand. You need out of this grind, Mira. You've got hollows under your eyes where dreams used to live. Mira exhaled. Sheriff Morrison and the banker Harlan Shaw. Calder said I should ask them. Rosalie untied her apron. Then let's go. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, the late afternoon sun had turned the dust golden. Sheriff Morrison stood on the porch, a toothpick between his teeth and boots crossed at the ankles. Ladies, he greeted with a nod. Rosalie. Mira. Trouble no, Sir Mira said. Just a question about Calder Yazzie. The sheriff leaned forward slightly, the toothpick shifting. Man's a vault. Quiet. Keeps his business tight. Doesn't gamble, doesn't drink more than one. Paid off his property in 3 years flat. Helped the Reynolds boy get his leg set when no doctor was around. What did he do now? Offered me work, she said. 40 a month. Room and board. Morrison let out a low whistle. That's a generous offer. But Calder don't do things by halves. You trust him, Mira pressed. With my horse, my money, or my niece? All three, he said without hesitation. Outside the Ely Bank, Mira hesitated on the steps. Second thoughts, Rosalie asked. No, Mira murmured. I'm building a case. Inside Mr. Harlan Shaw, the banker adjusted his spectacles when he saw her. Miss Tallman. What brings you in, Calder Yazzie, she said plainly. Offered me a job. I want to know if he's got the funds to back it. Shaw's lips twitched. Only man I've seen make money during a drought, always ahead on his notes, pays his hands on time. His accounts are better than the bank's. Mira thanked him and walked out into the wind. Her thoughts buzzed like flies in summer heat. Rosalie looped her arm through hers. I'll help you draw up the contract. That night after her saloon shift, Mira sat at Rosalie's kitchen table, candlelight flickering across ink-stained fingers. She didn't have fancy paper, just the back of a ledger sheet, and her father's fountain pen, which she'd kept, though it hadn't written a check in years. She listed her conditions clearly. Monthly wage $40. Room and board included. No personal obligation beyond agreed-upon duties, cooking, cleaning, bookkeeping. 1 day off every 2 weeks. 2-week notice required from either party to terminate the agreement. At the bottom, she left space for both signatures. I'm not stupid, she said softly, but I am tired, and tired women make mistakes. Rosalie reached for her hand. This time you're not making one. The next morning, Mira stood outside the hotel on Main, heart pounding as she knocked on the door marked Room 9. Calder opened it almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting just behind it. He stepped aside silently. The room was simple, a bed with a clean quilt, a chair, a table with a folded coat draped across it. Calder didn't speak until she pulled the contract from her bag and set it on the table. I wrote this up last night, she said. I won't take a step off that wagon unless we both sign. He read it in silence, eyes moving slowly, brow furrowing only once near the middle. When he looked up, there was something like respect in his eyes. You missed one thing, he said. Mira bristled. What's that 6-month minimum? Calder replied. If you're coming to the ranch, it needs to be for more than a trial. It'll take time for both of us to know if it works. You stay 6 months unless I break the terms. Then you can walk whenever you want. She hesitated. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime when every day so far had been a fight just to reach the next one. But freedom wasn't free, and safety, real safety, needed time to grow. 6 months, she agreed, if you sign it. He picked up the pen and did just that. His signature was steady, practical, no flourish. He handed her the pen. She signed. There, she said, surprised at how final the sound of the paper felt when she smoothed it down. 6 months of my life in exchange for freedom, and I want that in ink, not promises. Calder folded the contract and placed it inside his coat. I head back Monday. Can you be ready by then? Mira thought of the saloon, the laundry, the sleepless hours, and the cough that had started in her chest weeks ago. She thought of the look Rosalie gave her after the contract was done, like someone lighting a lantern in a cave. I'll be ready, she said. He nodded once. As she stepped into the morning light, Mira felt the weight of something shift. Not gone, but manageable, a burden shared. She still had a life to uproot, debts to tie up, and goodbyes to make. But she had a destination now. A place with a name. Steptoe Valley. And a man waiting not with empty words, but a promise signed in ink. That wagon ride out of Ely felt like falling off a cliff, except I wasn't sure if I was free-falling or flying. The wind kicked up as Mira stood on the dusty main street, one hand holding her worn trunk, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. Sunday noon in Ely wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. Children darted between buildings. The clang of a hammer echoed from the blacksmith's shop. Somewhere down the street, the saloon doors flapped in the breeze like the town was breathing. And then the wagon appeared. Drawn by 2 sturdy roans and driven by Calder Yazzie, the wagon rolled toward her like it had been moving since dawn. Mira's breath hitched when she saw him, dark shirt, brimmed hat, gloves resting in his lap, still and straight-backed. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. just slowed the wagon and climbed down without a word. He took her trunk like it weighed nothing, lifting it into the back of the wagon with the same silent purpose he wore like a second skin. Then he extended a hand to her. Mira hesitated. Not out of fear. Not quite. But once she took that hand, everything behind her would stay behind. She reached up. His palm was rough and warm, his grip firm. He helped her onto the bench beside him, then climbed back into his seat and gave a soft whistle to the horses. They rolled out of town. The noise of Ely faded quickly behind them. The road narrowed to a track dust rising behind the wagon wheels like a ribbon unfurling. Mira sat straight, eyes forward, hands folded in her lap. She felt Calder glance her way once or twice, but he didn't speak. Neither did she. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was sturdy like uncut timber, thick with thought but not forced. The landscape stretched wide open and endless. The desert around them was pale gold and copper green, dotted with rabbit brush and clusters of sage. The sky felt bigger than any ceiling she'd ever known. How far, she asked, finally. About 10 miles, Calder said. Little over 2 hours, slow pace with weight. She nodded. Land looks dry. It is, he replied. But the creek cuts through the center. There's grass if you manage it right. Horses do better than cattle most years. Mira leaned back slightly. You've lived there long. Bought the place 5 years ago. Took 2 years just to get it livable. Alone, Calder's jaw moved slightly, but his voice remained steady. Started with a partner. Didn't work out. Rest's been just me. He didn't elaborate and she didn't press. The way he said it made it sound final. After another mile, he said, Why'd you stay in Ely so long with all that weight on you? Mira looked out at the dry ridges in the distance. Because leaving meant admitting I couldn't do it all. My father died owing more than he left behind, and the mining company knew I'd honor it. Every man in town thought I was a fool. But I kept at it. She paused, then added, Until you showed up in a dark corner offering me something that sounded like salvation or a scam. Calder chuckled softly, low surprising. Fair reaction. Mira glanced at him. Why me? He kept his eyes on the trail. Because I've watched people break under less. And you were still standing. The words sat between them, solid and unvarnished. She didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. They passed a dry wash where bones of cattle lay scattered like discarded stories. A hawk circled overhead. What about your family? She asked. Dead or gone, he said simply. My mother was Shoshone. My father came west from Arkansas after the war. They tried to make a life in Utah, but the land failed. My mother passed when I was 17. My father hung on another year, then drank himself into a shallow grave. I left and never looked back. Mira's throat tightened, but she stayed quiet. Loss recognized loss. I took the little money I had. Calder continued and found a place with water rights. Worked other ranches until I had enough to stake my own. You always work alone. He shook his head. Got a foreman now, Ben Tahoma. Half Shoshone. Steady hands. Knows the land better than I do. Couple of younger hands during the busy months. But the house has been empty too long. They crested a small rise and Mira gasped. Below them stretched a wide basin rimmed by distant mountains and split by a meandering line of green where the creek wound through. Fencing crisscrossed the pastures. In the center stood a 2-story ranch house built from weathered stone and timber, its sloped roof catching the light. A barn sat behind it, sturdy and clean. Smoke rose from a smaller chimney nearby. That's it, she asked. Yazzie Ranch, Calder confirmed. It's bigger than I thought. Been left to gather dust these past few months, he admitted. I tried to keep up with it, but I don't have the hours or the hands. As they rolled down the trail, Mira saw cattle in the distant pasture and horses grazing near the barn. A man she assumed was Ben tipped his hat as they passed. He had gray at his temples and eyes like still water. Calder pulled the wagon around to the front porch and set the brake. Then he climbed down and extended his hand again. Mira took it. The moment her boots hit the packed dirt of the yard, something shifted inside her, something deep. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was the first time in months she didn't feel the weight of the world pressing her spine inward. Calder unloaded her trunk and carried it to the front door. When he opened it, the scent of dust and wood greeted her. The main room was wide with a stone fireplace, a table surrounded by mismatched chairs, and sunlight streaming through tall windows. The dust was thick, but the bones of the house were strong. Your room's upstairs, second door on the right, Calder said, setting her trunk down. I'll unpack and get started, she said. Not today, he replied. Rest. You've had a long week. Mira straightened. You're paying me to work, and you'll work, he said, voice firm. But the job doesn't start until tomorrow. She studied him for a beat, then nodded. Upstairs, her room was plain: a bed with a faded quilt, a small dresser, a window overlooking the creek. She sat on the bed and looked out at the land. It didn't feel like hers, not yet. But maybe if she stayed the course, it might feel like home. She stood, rolled up her sleeves, and began unpacking. If you think I came here just to clean and nod, you've mistaken me for someone who breaks easy. The morning sun hadn't yet warmed the earth when Mira stepped barefoot onto the creaking floorboards of her room, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The house was quiet, except for the soft whistle of wind seeping through the cracks of the old timber. Dust still lined the windowsills, but already something felt different. Her presence in this house had changed the stillness. She moved downstairs, following the faint scent of coffee and pine smoke. Calder was at the stove, flipping flapjacks with one hand while pouring a tin mug with the other. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing corded forearms that flexed with easy rhythm. You're up early, he said, without turning. Old habit, she replied. 3 jobs don't allow much sleeping in. He glanced back, his gaze scanning her loose braid and cotton work dress. You don't have to start hard right away. I meant it, you can ease in. Mira stepped past him, took up a rag, and began wiping down the long dining table. And I meant it when I said I work. I've never come to a place just to rest. He studied her for a beat, then nodded and set 2 plates on the table. Eat first, plenty to do after. They ate quietly, the silence not heavy, but filled with the comfort of motion, 2 people sharing a rhythm without forcing it. Afterward, Mira washed up, while Calder stepped out to check the horses. She walked the house with purpose, making mental lists as she moved curtains that needed soaking, lamps that needed refueling, a door hinge in the pantry, squealing like a scalded cat. The place wasn't ruined, just tired, like it had been waiting for someone to care again. By mid-morning, Mira had scrubbed half the downstairs floor and was hauling rugs out to beat when she saw Ben Tahoma approaching the house with a younger man trailing behind him, short, freckled, maybe 20. Mornin', Miss Mira. Ben greeted, tipping his hat. Thought I'd bring Eli up today so you could meet him proper. He's one of the hands who'll be sticking around through the season. Eli shifted nervously and smiled. Ma'am, Mira smiled back. Pleasure to meet you. Hope you're not scared of a woman with a broom. Ben chuckled. Only if it's flying. Eli relaxed and they shared a warm moment before heading around back. Mira returned to her work, but she noticed Calder standing off near the fence, watching quietly. Not in a possessive way, more like he was measuring how the pieces of his world were beginning to move again. The afternoon sun rose hot. Mira tied a damp kerchief around her neck and tackled the parlor, her body aching, but her spirit steady. She was elbow-deep in polishing the mantel when a voice startled her. "You clean like a woman possessed." She turned to see a tall figure leaning in the doorway, sharp brown eyes, short braid, and a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Inez," the woman said. "I cook for the crew during branding season, sew during roundup, and sometimes show up just to stir the pot. Calder said you were hired on. I came to see if you're real." Mira blinked, then smirked. "Well, I bleed when I cut myself and sweat when I work." "Real enough." Inez gave a slow nod of approval. "Good. I like women who don't flinch." They sat later under the shade of the front porch, sipping sweet tea Calder had somehow conjured up from a crate of supplies. Inez told her about her people, Southern Paiute, how she'd grown up on the edge of nowhere, outsmarted every man who tried to box her in, and found a home in her own stubborn skin. "You ever been married?" Mira asked. Once, Inez replied, tossing a pebble off the porch. Didn't last. He thought marrying me meant owning me. I thought marrying him meant partnership. Turns out we were both wrong. Mira looked out at the grazing horses. "I swore I wouldn't marry until I could look a man in the eye and not feel like I owed him my soul." "That day might come," Inez said. "Or it might not. Either way, you're building something here. I see it already." Later, as twilight rolled in, Mira made stew from what little she could find: potatoes, dried beans, and a bit of salted pork. Calder came in after checking the fence line and paused at the scent. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "Neither did you have to give me a roof," she replied, setting a bowl on the table. They sat across from each other, lit by lamplight. Mira broke the silence after a few bites. "You ever think about bringing someone in permanent, someone to share the work, not just the housework?" Calder leaned back slightly, eyes thoughtful. "I did once. It didn't end well. Left you bitter." "No," he said quietly. "Just careful." Mira nodded, absorbing the honesty without pressing further. She liked that about him. He didn't hide things, just let them rest where they fell. That night, Mira walked the halls after midnight, checking the windows, securing the latches. As she turned back toward her room, she noticed Calder's door cracked open, lamplight flickering within. She paused. He sat at his desk, writing something in a leather-bound ledger. Noticing her shadow, he looked up. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too quiet," she admitted. "Town noise used to cover the worries in my head. Out here, it's just me and them." Calder stood, crossed the room, and handed her a thick, folded quilt. "Sometimes comfort isn't about quiet. It's about knowing someone else is listening." She took the quilt slowly, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. As she walked back to her room, heart beating slower now, she knew something had shifted, not in a loud thunderclap kind of way, but like a creak carving through rock over time. She wasn't just working a job. She was building a place for herself, and someone else was beginning to notice. "I didn't climb out of one mess just to be dragged into another. If I stay, it's on my terms." The morning broke hard, with wind clawing at the shutters and clouds bruising the sky. Mira stood at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water. Her mind already miles ahead, planning meals, making repairs, calculating what she could fix on the house without needing money she didn't have. She dried her hands and headed out to the porch with a fresh cup of coffee. The gust almost stole the cup right from her fingers. Inez was already there. Her boots kicked up on the railing, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon like she expected something to come riding out of the mist. "Heard there's trouble coming," Inez said, without looking at her. "Not the kind that knocks." the kind that pries. Mira followed her gaze to the east pasture where Calder stood, talking to a man near a truck's slim-billed pressed shirt, too new for ranch work, and a mouth that moved like it always had something slick to sell. "Who's that?" Mira asked. Inez's jaw tightened. "That's Avery Sloan, bank rep, son of the same Sloan who's been circling this land like a hawk for years. Says he wants to help Calder restructure the loan. What he wants is the land beneath his boots." Mira's pulse picked up. She set the coffee down carefully, her voice steady but low. "Does Calder owe them?" Inez nodded. "Back taxes, old debts from when the cattle market dipped. He kept folks employed when others laid off. He did right, but banks don't care about doing right. Just about figures." Mira's fists curled at her sides. She'd seen this before, people swooping in to scoop up homes at their lowest. She could still hear the sound of her mother's sobs the day their landlord changed the locks without warning. She walked back inside, but her feet didn't take her to the kitchen. They carried her to Calder's ledger. She stared at it for a long moment, then opened the worn leather cover. The numbers were worse than she'd guessed. Back payments stretching months. Feed bills, vet expenses, equipment repair notes. Her throat tightened. When Calder walked in a few minutes later, shaking rain off his hat, she met him square in the eye. "You should have told me," she said. "Told you what? That the bank's circling. That this place might not make it through the next season." He exhaled and dropped the hat onto the hook by the door. "Didn't think it was your burden. I work here. I live here. I have a say. You're not." He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "I wasn't trying to hide anything." Mira stepped closer. "Don't treat me like something fragile, Calder. I didn't climb out of one mess just to be dragged into another. If I stay, it's on my terms." "And what terms are those?" he asked, quieter now. "That we fight," she said. "That we don't roll over and let some pencil pusher take this land. You said you hired me because I knew how to hustle. Let me prove it." He hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. That afternoon, they spread the ledger and ranch maps out across the dining table. Mira, Calder, Inez, and Ben hunched over them like generals in a war room. They plotted everything: the barn repairs that could wait the hay orders, that could be split the side pasture, that could be leased short-term to a neighboring operation. Mira offered up her savings, just a small stack she'd scraped together over the years. "I don't want your money," Calder said, shaking his head. "I'm not offering it as a gift," she snapped. "It's an investment. I get it back with interest or with a piece of this place." He blinked at that, surprised by her fire. Ben grinned. "I like her style." They worked until the oil in the lanterns ran low and their eyes burned. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was solid. And more than that, it was theirs. 2 days later, a storm rolled in, drenching the land and filling the creeks. It made movement harder, and it gave Mira time to dig deeper. She rode into town with Inez under the excuse of stocking up on salt and flour, but she stopped at the county recorder's office. A few well-placed questions, and one $10 fee later, she had copies of the land title and the lien agreements. What she saw chilled her: a clause buried in the fine print that allowed Sloan to foreclose early if certain conditions weren't met. They weren't just circling. They were waiting to strike. Back at the ranch, Calder sat on the porch repairing a broken stirrup when Mira dropped the file into his lap. "You're one signature away from losing everything," she said. He didn't flinch, just read quietly, jaw tightening with each line. "So what do? We use their tactics against them," she said. "We cut off their leverage." Over the next few days, Mira worked like a woman possessed. She filed 2 grant applications for agricultural relief, submitted paperwork to get their beef registered with a local co-op, and contacted an old friend who knew a rancher's market in Utah looking for grass-fed product. Calder watched it all with a mix of awe and concern. "You're pouring everything into this," he said one night, voice low. "What if it doesn't work?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Then I'll know I didn't stand by." The next morning, just before sunrise, Mira saddled up one of the older mares and rode out to the ridge alone. The wind tore at her braid, and the distant hills looked like slumbering giants beneath the stormy sky. She needed a minute to remember why she chose this path. Why she hadn't just taken the money Calder offered and walked away. It wasn't just about a paycheck. It was about having something that couldn't be taken from her. Something real. As the sun broke through the clouds and poured gold over the valley, Mira sat straighter in the saddle. She was ready for what came next, and she wasn't alone. "Every scar on this land matches one on me, but I'll be damned if I let either be carved deeper without a fight." The rain had stopped, but the land was soaked clear through. Mud clung to Mira's boots as she crossed the yard toward the stable, her coat pulled tight, hair damp from where her hat failed to shield it. The sky, smeared with streaks of iron gray and brittle blue, mirrored the mood settling across the ranch. She found Calder in the main barn repairing a broken latch on the feed room. The scent of old hay leather and linseed oil filled the air. They approved one of the grants, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Her voice cracked with exhaustion and grit. "Not enough to cover everything. But it buys us time." Calder paused, screwdriver still in hand. His expression didn't change much, but she saw it in the slight lift of his shoulders, the way his breath released easier. "Time's a start," he said. "You've done more in 2 weeks than I managed in 2 years. You kept it standing." "That matters," she replied. Then after a beat, "But now we move." They worked together through the day, tightening fences, patching troughs, checking cattle. Ben joined them by mid-morning, his usual laughter muted by focus, while Inez managed supplies like she was preparing for a siege. Mira noticed Calder watching the skies often, as if expecting the land itself to turn on him next. But it wasn't the land they had to fear. It was the men behind contracts and handshake deals that curdled into knives. That night, as the wind kicked up dust again, and the scent of a dry lightning storm rose, Mira sat out back, scraping mud from her boots and running numbers through her head. Her hands ached. Her mind raced. Her heart beat harder than it should have. She didn't hear Calder approach until he spoke. "You remind me of my mother." Mira turned to find him leaning on the post near the stairs, silhouetted in porch light. "She ran this place after my father passed. Knew how to stretch every coin until it screamed. Stubborn as a bull and smart as a whip. She sounds like a legend." "She was. And she'd have liked you." Mira looked away, her throat tightening in a way that caught her by surprise. "I never knew that kind of woman growing up. My mama. She tried, but she was bone-tired from the start. Life never gave her time to dream, let alone fight." Calder sank into the chair beside hers. "Seems like you're doing both." "Trying," she said. Then, eyes locked on the ridge in the distance, she added, "Every scar on this land matches one on me, but I'll be damned if I let either be carved deeper without a fight." Calder didn't say anything at first. Then quietly, "I didn't think anyone would stand with me through this. I'd started to think maybe I wasn't worth the effort." Mira turned to him, eyes fierce. "Don't say that. You're the only reason this ranch still breathes. This land, it holds stories, roots. People like Sloan don't care about that, but I do. And I know you do too." His gaze lingered on her face, and for a moment everything stilled, the wind, the dry creak of the barn door, the ache of the past. just the quiet understanding between two people carrying more than their share. The next morning, Mira was up before dawn, walking the outer fence line. She liked the silence of early hours when the world still whispered possibilities. But as she rounded the back pasture, she stopped short. A portion of the fence was down, and fresh tracks' boot prints cut through the wet earth, leading straight across the field toward the old shed that housed feed reserves. Her heart dropped. By the time she got back to the main house, Calder and Ben were already there, both of them flushed and tense. "They got in," Calder said, holding up a splintered hinge. Ben nodded grimly. "About half the feed's gone. They broke the lock and hauled out what they could carry, left the rest scattered." Mira's jaw clenched. "Sloane's doing no proof," Calder said. "But the timing's no coincidence." "They want us to panic," she said, "to feel surrounded." Ben muttered, "It's working." "No, it isn't," Mira snapped. "We're not going to fold." Calder looked at her. "What's your move? Get ahead of them. Make noise, draw attention to what they're doing. They think we're quiet country folk too scared to bite back. Let's show them different." By noon, Mira had made 3 phone calls to a local journalist she once met during a town council gig, to the agricultural co-op director she'd pitched last week, and to a lawyer who owed her a favor from back in San Antonio. She knew the power of pressure. If the legal route failed, public scrutiny might buy them some breathing room. Inez helped her gather photos of the vandalized shed receipts of the missing feed and copies of the questionable clauses in the Sloane contracts. Ben drove the documents to town himself, grumbling the whole way, but gripping the folder like it held Holy Writ. The ranch went on. Cattle still needed tending. Fences still needed mending. The work didn't pause for threats. That night, Mira returned to the ridge where she'd watched the sunrise days before. This time, Calder followed her. "You always come out here when your head's full," he said. "I come out here when I need to remember what matters." The valley below lay quiet and bruised in twilight. The barn roofs shimmered with the last of the daylight, and the cattle moved slow as shadows in the fields. "You think we're gonna make it?" Calder asked. Mira didn't answer right away. "Then I think we already are. We're not rolling over. We're fighting." Calder nodded. "You changed things around here." She looked at him, her voice soft. "So did you. You gave me a chance when no one else would. That counts for something." His hand brushed hers briefly. "Just enough to say I see you. Just enough to promise more when the storm passed." They walked back in silence, side by side. Inside, the oil lamp flickered low. The house groaned with old age and stubbornness, and somewhere out there trouble stirred again. But Mira was ready. "I don't need to be saved, but I'll stand beside anyone who fights with me, not over me." Mira sat alone at the kitchen table, a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee in her hand. The house was still the morning, just beginning to stir outside. The ranch, for all its wear and bruises, breathed a kind of stubborn calm that settled in Mira's bones even as her heart was pacing. She'd barely slept. Her mind was stuck on the break-in, the looming debt, the tightening sense of being cornered. She stared at the newspaper in front of her. "Local rancher accuses bank of land grab." Small article, buried below a cattle auction announcement. But it was there. Her call had worked barely, enough for a flicker. Calder entered quietly, shirt half-buttoned, hair still damp from the pump basin. "You see this?" she asked, sliding the paper across the table. He picked it up, scanned it. "Not exactly front page." "No," she replied, "but it's a beginning. Let them know we've got a voice." He nodded slowly, setting it down with care. Then carefully, "I've been thinking about your offer, the money, the investment. I was wrong to push it away." Mira looked up, surprised. But if this is going to be a partnership, Calder said it needs to be more than just financial. I want to draw you in officially. Not just as a worker or helper. She studied him for a moment. His eyes were clear, serious, not patronizing, not desperate, just plain and earnest. I don't need to be saved, she said, voice even, but I'll stand beside anyone who fights with me, not over me. His lips curled faintly. Good. Because we've got more fight coming. Later that morning, the wind shifted and the heat broke into a soft breeze. Mira rode out with Inez to check the northern boundary. It was quiet, too quiet, until they spotted the truck parked just off the edge of the public road. Same dark SUV, same smug figure leaning against the hood, Avery Sloane. Mira stiffened in the saddle. Well, look who crawled out of the shadows, Inez muttered. Avery raised a hand in mock greeting as they approached. Ladies, he drawled. Beautiful day to be civil. What do you want? Mira asked flatly. Just keeping tabs. It's what responsible parties do, he said, with a smile that never reached his eyes. I hear there's been trouble. Thought you might need guidance. Inez laughed without humor. The only thing we need from you is distance. Avery's gaze lingered on Mira. You've stirred quite the little storm, haven't you? Legal filings, public accusations. Dangerous game for someone without solid footing. Mira's knuckles whitened on the reins. Is that a threat? Just a reminder. Some fights don't end with justice. They end with exhaustion. She leaned forward in her saddle. Well then, I hope you've packed provisions. Because I don't wear out easy. Avery's smile slipped just for a second. Then he straightened and tipped his hat. We'll see. He drove off without another word, tires kicking up dust like a warning shot. Mira and Inez sat quiet for a moment, watching the trail disappear. That man smells like something rotting under a porch, Inez finally said. Back at the ranch, Mira gathered the team, Calder, Ben, and Inez. She laid out the latest message from the lawyer she'd contacted. There was a loophole in the land contract buried deep, but if they could prove Sloane's representatives had tampered with fence lines or feed stores, they could freeze proceedings and delay foreclosure. It would buy them at least 3 months, maybe more. But we need proof, Mira said. Photographs, witness statements. Anything that shows they crossed a line. Ben frowned. I know a guy works feed delivery for 3 counties. Said he saw a Sloane truck near here 2 nights ago. Thought it was odd, but didn't want to get involved. Get him talking, Calder said. They split up. Mira and Calder rode out to the sheds again, checking for anything they'd missed. Inez contacted the co-op director and the journalist again, pressing for follow-up coverage. Ben went into town to talk to his friend. By late evening, they gathered again on the porch. Ben had gotten a name and a rough time. The co-op offered to send a rep to inspect the damages, and the journalist promised to follow up if they could supply hard evidence. They were building a case. That night, Mira wandered the yard alone after dinner. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the pasture. She walked past the barn, past the chicken coop, down toward the fence line by the old orchard. She stopped when she saw movement, a dark figure at the edge of the field. She dropped low behind the stump of a fallen pecan tree and watched. The figure moved carefully, flashlight low near the fence. She snapped a photo, then another. Her breath held tight in her chest. She crept closer, trying to get a better angle. A twig cracked beneath her boot. The figure froze. Mira ducked, heart slamming. Then the beam of the flashlight swept toward her. She ran. Not back toward the house, but across the side pasture, looping wide toward the ridge where the old irrigation trench offered some cover. She crouched there, breath ragged, until the light faded and the figure retreated. She waited 10 more minutes before returning to the house. Inside, she found Calder sitting by the fire, the day's wear still on his face. He stood when he saw her disheveled cheeks flushed. "What happened? I got pictures," she said. "Someone was on the property. Same build as Avery. I couldn't get a clear face, but it's a start. You followed him alone. I didn't have time to wake the house." Calder stepped closer, hands on her shoulders. "Don't do that again. Not alone. I had to." "No, you didn't. We're in this together now. I'm not losing you over a photo." Mira's breath caught at the depth in his voice. There was fear there, real raw. Not for the ranch, but for her. She placed a hand over his. "Then we fight smarter. Together." The fire crackled behind them. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of mesquite and the silent promise of another long night ahead. But Mira wasn't shaken. She was just getting started. "I built walls to protect myself, but this place, it's teaching me how to trust again." The next morning, Mira's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee into tin mugs. Her boots were still damp from the night before, the soles caked in dry orchard mud. She'd barely slept, her mind looping back to that flashlight beam, the sound of footsteps in the dark, and Calder's hands gripping her shoulders like he was holding something too precious to lose. She set one mug in front of him without a word. Calder glanced at her, then down at her scraped knuckles. "You all right? I will be," she answered, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I sent the photos to the lawyer this morning. It's not a smoking gun, but it's enough to stall their hand." He nodded slowly, then reached for the thermos to top her mug off. "Ben's headed into town again. Inez, too. I asked her to talk to the sheriff. Not that he's ever been quick to lift a finger. The more light we shine, the less they can hide in." Outside, the ranch stirred like it always did, slow and rhythmic, never knowing the full weight of what it carried. Cattle lowed in the distance, and the wind pushed through the barn's cracked boards like a whistle from the past. As Mira stepped outside, the warmth of the rising sun spread across her back, but it didn't reach the cold worry in her chest. She crossed the yard to check the feed bins again, then paused at the corner post of the porch, her gaze drifting up toward the roofline. It had been patched hastily after the last storm, a few shingles out of alignment. She made a note in her head, something they'd have to fix before summer heat turned everything brittle. She'd begun thinking of repairs in terms of we, and that realization stopped her in her tracks. For years, Mira had bounced between jobs and towns like a woman without a shadow. She never planted her feet too deep. She never let her voice root in anyone's plans, always waiting for the ground to shift. But now, she looked out at the fields, the rolling hills, the tired barn leaning but not broken. Every inch of this place had her fingerprints on it, now scraped palms, sweat-soaked shirts, a dozen hard-earned victories and losses stitched into the soil. She went to saddle the old bay mare, her favorite of the bunch, calm-eyed and sure-footed. She needed a ride, a place to think. She headed west toward the river bend. That trail had become her solace, quiet winding, flanked by thick oaks and lazy brush. The kind of place where the past didn't shout so loud. She stopped near the rocks where the creek forked, dismounted and sat. Her fingers trailed the water's edge. "I built walls to protect myself, but this place, it's teaching me how to trust again," she whispered to no one but the breeze. It was true. She'd never intended to stay. Calder's offer had felt like a soft landing after too many hard ones. But the land at the people, the fight, they'd wrapped themselves around her ribs like a second skin. And Calder. She'd seen the way his eyes softened when she spoke, the way he moved closer without crowding her, always letting her set the pace. He never made her feel small, never made her feel owned, just seen. When she rode back to the ranch, she found Calder working with Inez by the front pasture. A new calf had slipped through a loose gate and was stuck in the brush. Inez waved her over without missing a beat. "You ever untangle a cow from a thicket without getting a hoof to the chest?" she asked dryly. Mira swung off her horse, smirking. Only once. Didn't end pretty. Together, the three of them eased the calf out, Mira whispering soft reassurances while Calder worked the rope. It wasn't graceful, but they managed. The calf bellowed once, then trotted back toward its mother. "Teamwork," Calder said, brushing sweat from his brow. Mira grinned. "Don't get used to it. I'm still billing overtime in my head." That earned a laugh from Inez, and even Calder cracked a grin. Later that evening after dinner, the house hummed low with quiet talk. Ben returned from town with word the sheriff had agreed to look into the trespass report, especially after the photos and the co-op's interest in the story. "He won't admit it, but Sloane's name is getting stickier by the day," Ben said, leaning against the doorframe. "That article did more than you think." "It's a start," Mira replied. "But we need to hold." Calder walked her to the back porch as the sun sank a faint pink, bleeding into the vast blue above the trees. The hush of night settled over them. "I've never seen this place fight like it's doing now," he said. "You've changed the rhythm here." Mira wrapped her arms around herself. "Maybe it was always in the soil. Just needed stirring." Calder leaned against the rail beside her. "You gonna stay, not just for the season? For real?" She turned to him. "I don't know yet, but I'm not running. Not today. That's enough for me." He reached out, brushing a bit of hay from her shoulder. The touch was simple, careful, but it lingered. The wind shifted again, soft and slow. Somewhere inside the house, Inez was humming a tune Mira didn't recognize, but it felt like home. Mira closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a visitor in her own life. The ranch isn't just land, it's every hand that's held it together when it was falling apart. It started before sunrise with a knock on the door loud enough to rattle the panes. Mira was already halfway dressed, having risen early to prep feed routes. She opened the door to find Inez with her hat in one hand and urgency written all over her face. "Ben's truck's been keyed. Tires slashed. Parked it outside the feed store last night. Nothing taken, but the message is loud and clear." Mira felt her chest tighten. "You think it was Sloane. I think that man wouldn't lift a finger to stop it if his crew did worse." Calder appeared behind her, buttoning his shirt. "That's the third incident in a week." Mira stepped out onto the porch, scanning the edge of the horizon. The air was too still, the kind of still that comes before something breaks loose. "We don't wait for them to make the next move." She turned back to them. "We call everyone in." Within the hour, the ranch buzzed with familiar trucks pulling up the gravel drive. Neighbors, cousins, local ranch hands, folks Mira had only seen once or twice. Most came at Calder's request, but others had heard the murmurs about the land dispute and came ready with open ears and calloused hands. The living room filled quick. Some stood, some sat on armrests or with backs against the wall. Calder cleared his throat, nodded to Mira, and stepped aside. Mira didn't climb on a chair or raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight in her tone was enough. "We've all seen what's happening," she said. "One by one, these ranches are being picked off. Quietly, legally. But the law don't always mean right. Murmurs of agreement. We've got a chance here not just to save this place, but to draw a line. Sloane's crew is crossing boundaries, trespassing, theft, intimidation. We've got photos, affidavits, and eyes willing to watch. What we need is presence, witnesses, people on the land. Not fighting, just holding ground." A grizzled man near the fireplace raised his hand. You want a watch rotation, I want them to know they're being seen, that they can't keep creeping in under cover of night. Ben added, We're setting up trail cams too. Quiet ones. Someone else chimed in, happy to lend mine. Mira looked around the room, her voice steady. The ranch isn't just land. It's every hand that's held it together when it was falling apart. There was a silence after that, one thick with meaning. Then heads nodded. Words passed. And within an hour, Mira had a rotating schedule pinned to the wall, and the ranch was no longer standing alone. By afternoon, Inez and 2 other neighbors had begun reinforcing the outer fences. Mira rode with Calder to inspect the back pasture where the last break-in had occurred. The land was vast, but Calder seemed to know every knot in every post. His quiet pride showed in the way his hands moved over the rough wood, as if each piece still mattered. They paused at the far corner of the ridge. Mira shaded her eyes. Looks like someone drove through here, she said, pointing at the shallow tire tracks curving along the property line. Calder knelt, fingers brushing the dirt. Not ours. Tread's wrong. I'll mark it. Get it documented. As they turned back toward the house, Calder said, You know, this land's been in my family for 3 generations. But I never saw it fight back until now. Mira smiled faintly. Maybe it just needed a little noise. That night, the porch became a gathering spot. Lanterns glowed in the dark, flickering like soft beacons. Conversations overlapped stories, plans, jokes, tension broken by shared purpose. Mira stepped away for a breath and found herself staring at the old barn again. So much of her effort had gone into saving the place, and still so much hung in the balance. She didn't hear Calder approach, but she felt the weight of him beside her. Got a minute, he asked. They walked past the garden gate down the path toward the small clearing behind the orchard. Fireflies blinked in the warm dark. I wanted to say something. Calder said, his voice low. About earlier. Mira turned toward him. I've always been the one fixing, patching, pulling things through by sheer stubbornness. But this time, if you hadn't shown up when you did, I don't think I could have held it all. She shook her head. You were holding it. You just didn't have anyone reminding you that it was worth the grip. He took a breath. You make this place better, Mira. The words landed soft but deep, and before she could respond, a shout echoed from the front of the property. They ran. When they reached the gate, they found Ben and one of the neighbors confronting 2 men in a dark truck parked just outside the boundary. One had stepped out, hands raised like he meant no harm, but his expression gave away everything. You're trespassing, Ben said, voice like gravel. Turn that wheel and go back the way you came. The man held out a small envelope, just delivering a message. Mira stepped forward. From whom he smirked. From someone who believes it's time to settle accounts. He dropped the envelope at her feet, turned and climbed back into the truck. The engine roared, and the tires spat dirt as it reversed down the road. Mira crouched, opened the envelope and scanned the paper. A formal notice. Intent to seize assets, backed by the lien. Calder read over her shoulder. They're not waiting. They're forcing foreclosure. Mira looked up at him, calm despite the storm in her chest. Then we push harder. Tomorrow we call the co-op, the lawyer, the press. Calder nodded. We don't blink. Mira folded the notice and tucked it into her back pocket. The fight was no longer quiet. It was just beginning to roar. I didn't come here to belong, I came here to build. But maybe belonging is what's building me. The morning broke heavy with heat, the kind that weighed down the shoulders before a single task was done. Mira stepped outside, wiping sleep from her eyes, already sensing that something had shifted. Not in the wind, not in the sky, but in her. Like some door had been nudged open inside, letting in a light she didn't know she needed. She found Calder in the main barn brushing down one of the colts. He looked up as she approached and offered a soft, worn smile. "Ben's setting up a camera near the north fence line," he said. "Wants to catch anyone creeping around again." "Good," Mira replied. "We've got to stay ahead of them." Calder's hand stilled on the colt's flank. "You didn't sleep much." Mira shrugged. "Hard to sleep when you know someone's trying to pull the ground out from under you." He studied her face. "It's not just the ranch, is it?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the far end of the stable where old tack hung from iron hooks like quiet memories. "I've been running so long, I forgot what it feels like to stay," she said finally. "I didn't come here to belong, I came here to build. But maybe belonging is what's building me." Calder didn't reply with words, just stepped closer and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a grounding weight that said everything his mouth didn't. By midday, the ranch was humming with motion. The support they'd gathered wasn't fading. Neighbors kept checking in. Supplies arrived from the co-op unexpectedly, a show of faith. Even the sheriff's deputy dropped by, leaving a business card and a clipped message. "Tell us if anything new happens. Folks up the chain are watching now." It was enough to spark hope. Not a blaze, but a steady ember. Inez brought out a fresh stack of paperwork, land usage logs, updated photos, and Mira's latest draft of the formal response to the foreclosure threat. "We've got the story," Inez said, tapping the file. "Now we just need someone to listen." Calder nodded. "That journalist coming back tomorrow," Mira answered. "He wants to walk the land this time, see it for himself." As the sun climbed, Mira joined Ben out at the edge of the east field. The soil was cracked thirsty from weeks without decent rain. But the cattle moved steady heads low, following their routine like nothing else mattered. "I remember a time," Ben said, tightening the gate latch when no one would have stood with this ranch. Not because they didn't care, but because it felt cursed. Like everything it touched slipped away. Mira glanced at him. "You think we changed that?" Ben chuckled. "I think you did. You brought noise and fire, and somehow that's what this place needed." She smiled, but there was a heaviness beneath it. Later that afternoon, Mira stepped into the small shed behind the barn, the one they used for supplies, but hadn't cleared in years. Dust cloaked every shelf, and old ledgers lay forgotten under brittle canvas tarps. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to shake off the pressure of waiting. Then she spotted it. An old journal. Leather cover, worn edges, the clasp broken. She opened it slowly and recognized the handwriting Calder's mother. Pages of crop rotations, equipment repairs, but also entries scrawled with emotion. "We're down to the last tank of diesel. Calder doesn't know. I won't let him worry. I watched the sun rise over the ridge today and told myself, we're still here. That has to be enough." Mira sank to the floor, heart caught in her throat. These were the words of a woman who'd fought this same battle, different players, same stakes, and she hadn't folded. She'd built something worth passing on. Mira read until the light outside began to fade, then tucked the journal into her satchel and stepped back into the golden dusk. The ranch glowed beneath the setting sun, fences casting long shadows, dust curling in lazy spirals. As she walked up to the house, she saw Calder on the porch, whittling a scrap of cedar. "I found something," she said, holding up the journal. He looked up, brows lifting. "Where the shed?" "Your mom's handwriting?" He reached for it like it was a relic. As he flipped through the pages, Mira watched his expression shift, tight at first, then softening into something bittersweet. She kept us afloat longer than we ever knew, he murmured. She was a fighter, Mira said. And you are too. He looked at her then like he saw something he hadn't let himself believe until now. So are you. They sat together on the porch as the stars began to flicker above. The air smelled of hay and mesquite and something older, something rooted. I used to think belonging meant surrender, Mira said quietly. Giving up your edges to fit inside someone else's box. But maybe it's not about shrinking. It's about choosing who you'll stand with when it gets hard. Calder didn't speak, just took her hand. Not tight, not demanding. Just enough to say I know. I feel it too. Inside the house was quiet. Inez had retired early and Ben was still out checking fence posts with one of the neighbors. A storm had begun to build in the west, the air thickening with each passing minute. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. But Mira wasn't afraid of storms anymore. She knew who she was standing with now, and she knew she wasn't standing alone. The storm tried to tear down what we built, but the roots held. The rain came just before dawn, thick and angry, hammering the porch roof in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. Mira stood at the window, arms folded tight across her chest, watching the trees bow and the pasture blur into a gray wall. The sky was split with flashes of lightning that cracked like old scars being reopened. She didn't flinch. Behind her, Calder stirred in the kitchen, setting a kettle to boil. The hum of routine steadied the moment. We've seen worse, he said, not turning. We weren't fighting a foreclosure and sabotage, then she replied. He handed her a mug, steam curling between them. Still standing. She sipped the heat, biting her lip, and nodded. By mid-morning, the power flickered twice before cutting completely. Inez lit oil lamps without missing a beat. Ben walked in, dripping from head to toe, hair plastered to his forehead. East fence is down, he said. One of the oaks split and took half the post line with it. No cattle through yet. Let's move, Calder said, already pulling on his boots. I'll come too, Mira added. No, Calder said, firm but not unkind. You stay and coordinate the co-op inspection. They called earlier, still sending someone. Want to see if what you reported lines up. Mira hesitated. Be careful. Calder offered a ghost of a smile. I'm not going anywhere. She watched them disappear into the mist, then set to work. She checked the files again, made sure everything was ready. The paperwork, the damage logs, the journal from Calder's mother now marked with sticky notes and tags. The inspector arrived just before noon, a wiry woman named Cheryl with crow's feet and a no-nonsense stare. Mira greeted her with a firm handshake and a binder full of documentation. They spent the next 2 hours walking through the shed, the feed barn, the weakened perimeter where the break-in had happened. Mira pointed out every mark, every shift in fencing, every sign of tampering. Cheryl took photos, notes, and nodded occasionally. You know, Cheryl said as they stood beneath the half-collapsed shelter, most folks wouldn't bother with all this. They'd fold cell, cut their losses. Mira's jaw tightened. That's why Sloan gets away with it. People give up. We're not. Cheryl studied her for a long moment. Good. They returned to the main house just as the rain picked up again. The windows rattled and a gust blew open the mudroom door with a bang. Mira jumped, then moved to latch it. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. One new message. Sheriff's office, call us immediately. Urgent. She dialed without thinking, heart thudding. The voice on the other end was curt. There was an incident, the deputy said. A truck matching a Sloan Company vehicle was found ditched outside town. Burned. Witness says they saw 2 men running from it headed east. Mira's stomach sank. Anyone hurt? No. But this was deliberate. Retaliation, maybe. Thought you should know, especially if you've got folks out there. Her fingers curled around the phone. They're out fixing fence. We'll send a unit to patrol the area, but keep your people close. Mira hung up, heart pounding. She turned to Cheryl, who was already pulling her coat on. I've seen enough, Cheryl said. You've got my report. If Sloan tries to deny this, they'll have to answer for a lot more than a few unpaid debts. The storm swallowed Cheryl's car as she pulled away. Mira grabbed her slicker and radio and bolted out the door. She found Calder and Ben near the split oak, soaked and mud-streaked, but still working. The wind tugged at their jackets as branches creaked and leaves spun like warnings. There was a fire, she shouted over the wind. One of Sloan's trucks. Sheriff's looking for them. Ben cursed under his breath. Calder straightened. Did they come through here? Not yet, she said. But they're running. And if they're desperate, they might lash out. We've got to finish this fence before the cattle push through. I'll help, she said. Together, the three of them secured the line with wire and fresh posts. The rain burned their eyes, and thunder kept rattling above them like a warning drum, but no one quit. When the last staple was hammered in, Calder stood back and looked down the line. It'll hold, he said. Mira leaned against the fence, breath coming hard, rain slipping down her neck. The storm tried to tear down what we built, she said softly, but the roots held. Calder turned to her. That's because of you. No, it's because of all of us. They rode back in silence, drenched and heavy with exhaustion. The house glowed ahead like a beacon through the fog. Inez had a fire-going stew bubbling and dry towels stacked by the door. Later that night, Mira sat in her room alone, watching lightning streak across the distant sky. She pulled out the journal again, running her fingers over the last page where Calder's mother had written, "You fight for the land, not because it owes you, but because it shapes you. And when the fight's over, you'll know who you are." Mira closed the book. She was beginning to understand. The land didn't just survive the storm, neither did I. We came out stronger, and this time I'm not walking away. The morning after the storm arrived, clear and still, as if the wind had spent its fury and left behind a silence too large to fill. The sun rose slow, casting long light across the ranch, revealing broken branches, scattered debris, and the sheer resilience of a place that had stood through decades of hardship and still stood now. Mira stepped outside, the journal clutched in her hand, her boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. The storm had rattled more than just windows. It had unearthed a part of her she thought she'd buried, something fierce, something rooted. She headed toward the barn, where Calder and Ben were already at work, dragging limbs away from the fence, checking the animals. Inez was directing two of the younger neighbors who had returned to help with cleanup. The whole place buzzed with life, bruised but breathing. "You sleep at all?" Calder asked, not looking up from the splintered post he was hammering back into place. Mira shook her head. "Not much." The storm kept replaying. "Same here," Ben muttered. "Thunder like that wakes up ghosts." Mira walked the length of the barn, inspecting the damage. A few shingles gone. One small section of the roof bent back like a page in an old book. Nothing unfixable. "Fence held," Calder said, glancing up at her now. "That new post line you helped with held steady." Mira smiled, small but real. It had to. She helped them clear the path leading down to the south pasture where a few young steers had gotten spooked and pressed into the far end. As they worked, Mira felt something settle in her. Not just purpose, not just determination, but peace. Not the kind that came from calm, but the kind born from facing down chaos and choosing to plant your feet anyway. Back at the house, she sorted through the inspector's notes. Cheryl had emailed her a copy of the report that morning, confirming tampering and mismanagement from the Sloan representatives. It wouldn't dissolve the foreclosure threat completely, but it gave them leverage, something legal and solid. I sent it to the lawyer, she told Calder over lunch. He's confident. Says it's enough to call a hearing. Get the process delayed long enough to push for dismissal. Calder looked at her quiet. You ever think you'd be doing this, fighting for someone else's land, like it was your own? Mira leaned back, considering the question. I didn't come here to stay. I came here because I was tired of scraping by for people who never saw me. But this place, this fight makes sense in a way nothing else has. Calder nodded, a slow understanding passing between them. That afternoon, they met with the sheriff's deputy, who came out to review the damage from the truck fire and trespassing. He took statements, examined the perimeter, and promised to file a formal complaint. Still, Mira could tell he didn't expect much to come of it. They're slippery, the deputy said, eyes narrowing. Sloan's crew knows how to walk the line. But if you keep pressure on them, legal public, they'll start to feel it. Mira walked the deputy back to his cruiser. As he drove away, she lingered on the porch, eyes scanning the tree line. Every inch of this land felt familiar now. Not like a place she worked, but a place she'd bled into, a place she belonged. Later, Inez found her at the sink, sleeves rolled, washing dishes, while the house buzzed with quiet voices behind them. You've changed, Inez said plainly. Mira glanced over. You mean I'm dirtier and more exhausted? No, Inez said. You carry yourself different, like someone who knows they've already won, even if the battle's still going. Mira didn't answer right away. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter. I've been running my whole life, she said. Every job, every state line, every time something got too close, I bolted. Told myself it was freedom. But now I think I was just scared. Inez gave a small grunt of agreement. Most folks are, but not everyone faces it down. Mira looked out the window. The land didn't just survive the storm, neither did I. We came out stronger. And this time, I'm not walking away. That evening, Calder pulled out his mother's journal. He read aloud while the others sat around the table, the lantern flickering, stew steaming in chipped bowls. Hope doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like one more fence fixed, one more calf born, one more sunrise, and you hold on. The room was quiet after he finished. Not out of sorrow, but reverence. That kind of truth didn't ask for applause. Ben leaned back in his chair. So what now? Mira met his eyes. We finish what we started. We go to the hearing. We bring every document, every photo, every neighbor who'll speak. We tell the truth loud enough they can't ignore it. And if that fails, he asked. She looked to Calder, then Inez. Then we build again, she said. Because they can't take who we are. They can't take what we've made. The wind had quieted outside. The storm passed. But inside the house, something stronger remained. Not just resolve, but roots. The educational lesson learned from this story is that hard seasons don't always end because life gets easier. They end because we grow steadier. When you stand your ground with honesty, persistence, and the willingness to ask for help, even long-held struggles can begin to loosen their grip. It reminds us that building something worth keeping, whether land, family, or peace of mind, often comes from shared effort rather than solitary strength. And sometimes the greatest freedom arrives not from walking away, but from choosing to stay and tend what still has life in it.